In 1896, New York, USA, Eleanor Marks stood at the top of her father's Fifth Avenue staircase, clad in a silver silk gown stained with what guests first mistook for spilled wine, until the hostess herself failed to appear for the rest of the evening. A footman found the hem of her dress discarded inside the dumbwaiter shaft 2 floors below, torn and faintly smeared with soot. Eleanor, 23, was heiress to the Marks Iron Company, an industrial empire built on wartime rail contracts and tenement scaffolding. That night, over 70 guests had been invited, including a state senator and a reverend, all of whom left by midnight without a single formal statement. Eleanor's slippers remained beside the grand piano. The gas lights had flickered repeatedly between 10 and 10:15 p.m., according to the building engineer's log. Official inquiries would not begin until 4 days later. Who permitted the doors to stay locked until morning? Eleanor Marks was the polished daughter of a widowed magnate, admired for her poise, charitable work, and impeccable taste in lace and opals. But a housemaid's deposition taken April 4, 1896, listed 3 unclaimed cloaks, a decanter of emptied laudanum, and the name L. Roan scratched into the underside of Eleanor's vanity drawer before the investigator opened Chapter 1. The drawing room at the Marks residence felt unsettled, even before the first mention of Eleanor's absence. A low murmur of voices drifted through corridors that seemed unusually hushed, as though the walls themselves were hesitant to hold such a gathering. The grand chandelier overhead swayed gently, causing pale light to waver across ornate moldings and plush carpets that had absorbed a century of footsteps. Somewhere beyond the polished banisters, a door creaked in slow, uncertain protest, its hinges moving as if reluctant to disturb the hush. Dust motes hung in the air, illuminated by the weak, smoky glare of gas lamps, drifting in lazy circles as though caught in thought. The disturbance began in the soft hours of the morning, hours after the guests had departed, and the servants had realized both the absence and the absence of any clue. The city's newspapers reported that the family's chauffeur, Mr. Cullen, discovered an open passage door at precisely 2 a.m. He had risen to fetch water for the household and encountered a corridor bathed in shadow. The door, normally secured by a wrought iron latch, had been left ajar. Cullen's statement, written with a trembling hand, noted that silence filled the hallway so completely it pressed against his eardrums. He described the air as thick and stifling, as though the rooms themselves were holding their breath. He recalled the faint but unmistakable scent of lavender, the perfume Eleanor favored, lingering where she had surely never been seen since the evening. Not long after, the housekeeper, Mrs. Barton, found the guest register in Eleanor's dressing room. The register lay open on a small side table, the ink on the last name smudged, as if someone had hastily brushed against it. The entry belonged to Miss Adelaide Finch, a friend of the heiress whose name appeared in a neat looping script. Beside it, though, a second inscription, indecipherable and jagged, formed an uneasy contrast. Mrs. Barton, known for her composure, admitted later that her heart pounded so fiercely she thought she might faint. She mentioned the smell of wax and tea that normally perfumed the room had been replaced by an acrid odor, sharp and metallic, lingering beneath the lavender as though something had been burned. In the weeks that followed, not everyone spoke freely. Neighbors whispered of a candlelight seen flickering in the east wing after midnight, though the clock in the main hall had long since stopped at 10:17 p.m. Someone claimed they heard Eleanor humming, a lullaby she was said to whisper to her younger cousin during religious services. The hum, delicate and distant, emerged from an empty parlor, carried across hallways that should have been silent. Yet when staff searched the room, they found only the solitary figure of a porcelain vase, cracked and empty, the only disturbance a ring of dust around its base, suggesting it had been moved days earlier. Meanwhile, the city's sheriff, Mr. Collins, received a call from the station on the morning after the party. In his ledger, he recorded that the Marks residence had submitted no official missing person report. That omission was unusual. In New York of 1896, wealthy families prized discretion. The sheriff's entry noted that no lock had been broken, no sign of forced entry, and yet there were missing keys to both the front and back doors. Mrs. Barton declared she misplaced them in the confusion, though the locksmith's invoice that arrived 2 days later suggested she had ordered replacements for both, no mention of lost or stolen keys. The invoice lay unfiled in the ledger, again showing signs of hurried handling, and the lines of the printed numbers seemed slightly blurred, as though water had smeared the ink. The tension inside the house grew with every passing hour. Footsteps echoed in corridors where no one walked, or they seemed to, catching the attention of the night watch clerk, a young man named Lewis. He reported hearing a soft scuff of slippers advancing down the hallway beyond the library at midnight. He stood frozen for a moment, listening, his breath caught in a crust of familiar darkness until the sound ceased abruptly. He opened the door to find nothing but a faint imprint in the carpet, the pattern disturbed, a depression like someone had paused there. The plaster on the walls remained unmarked. Only the carpet gave witness. A ledger buried deep in the study offered the first written hint of irregularity. Eleanor's father, Mr. Charles Marks, noted on April 7th a payment of $50 to a local apothecary. The entry simply read medicine for Eleanor, but the handwriting, steady elsewhere, was shaky and wobbled through the date. The assistant to the apothecary later confirmed that the sum had purchased laudanum. The invoice described the vial as small and heavily labelled caution. A notation read 2-ounce dose, though at home Eleanor had always been known to suffer only mild ailments. No one recalled her being prescribed anything on such a scale. When the ledger was re-inspected, a smudge ran across the amount, as though water or sweat had caused the ink to run. Of the staff, only the seamstress, Miss Grant, offered a detail that seemed at once ordinary and alarming. She said Eleanor had asked to see a hidden stitch in her hem on the night of the party. The seamstress recalled Eleanor described it as wrong, though she could not say why. When the gown arrived for adjustment, the seam was heavy and stiff, as though it had been altered many times. Miss Grant recalled touching the fabric and feeling it temp rise, as though the silk had been warmed by a hand. Later she noticed the hidden stitch had been removed, and beneath it, the fabric felt firmer than surrounding areas, as though a small patch had been placed inside. These events coalesced into a mounting sense of unease, a whispering tension that threaded through every corner of the household. Outside the town, carriage wheels rolled over cobblestones, and pedestrians in top hats and collars passed the residence with no visible worry. Fashionable salons and gaslit streets held their usual vigor. But inside the Marks household, the air had grown heavy. There were murmurs in the servants' quarters, shadows in corners where gaslight dared not reach, and the creak of floorboards that seemed to respond to secrets. The first official sign that something was amiss came when the city's coroner, who happened to know the correct terminology, asked for permission to inspect the dumbwaiter shaft. A formal note arrived on April 10th, describing soot inside the shaft at multiple levels, but no other objects. The marks of heat were present, though no fire had likely occurred. The coroner's assistant recorded the smell of burnt cloth was still faint in the cold metal. It was signed E. Fletcher, Assistant Coroner. The note began with a standard heading yet ended with a single underlined word, urgent. That single word, underlined, captured the shift. What had begun as confusion was now undeniably serious. The household, once vibrant with wealth and family, was now silenced by the rumble of unanswered questions. And so, even as the city went on, the house kept its secrets within its walls, locked, dusty, motionless, waiting. 2 days after the coroner's note, silence continued to thicken within the Marks home. The household followed routines with mechanical obedience, though the rhythms were broken. Trays were brought upstairs and returned untouched. The brass pendulum clock in the library, normally wound every night by Eleanor herself, remained still. Its glass face fogged slightly in the evenings, though no fire had been lit nearby. Mrs. Barton insisted it was simply the weather. Yet the room was warm, too warm, stifling with a heat that did not move. On the morning of April 12th, a formal inquiry finally reached the desk of Inspector Thomas Elbridge, a former infantryman with the blunt, unadorned habits of one used to battlefield order. He received the matter not from the family, but by indirect means. A clerk at the records office noted inconsistencies in recent property tax filings for the estate and flagged the name Marks for internal review. The discrepancy, a small parcel of land listed as private garden, had been recently reclassified as structural holding without explanation. Eleanor's signature appeared at the bottom of the document, dated April 9th. But by then she'd already been missing for 5 days. Elbridge arrived unannounced that afternoon. The doorman, uncertain how to respond, admitted him without protest. Inside, the parlor was still adorned with remnants of the last celebration. A curling ribbon dangled from the curtain rod, brittle and grey. Plates from the buffet remained in the kitchen sink untouched. A half-empty decanter of port still sat at the edge of the table, its stopper slightly raised, as though paused mid-toast. Elbridge, trained to read the banal, noted everything. A woman's glove rested on the banister. It was left-handed, stitched with ivory thread, and bore a smudge of ink on the inner lining. Interviewing the staff proved fruitless at first. Their replies were formal, as though rehearsed. But in the pantry, a junior servant named Walter admitted in hushed tones that Eleanor had changed. He recalled her lingering by the servants' staircase in the week before the party. She stared at it like it had said something to her, he told Elbridge. She wouldn't go up, she just kept looking at it. When asked what time of day this had happened, he replied, "Always dusk, never in full light." That detail troubled Elbridge. He returned the following morning to examine the back stairwell. The steps were narrow, wooden, and bore the grime of constant use. On the third riser, beneath a loose board, he found a button. Simple in design, but the silk covering matched precisely the gown Eleanor wore that night. The discovery was not dramatic, but to Elbridge it confirmed proximity. She had descended those steps, willingly or otherwise. In the study he turned to the ledgers once more. A careful review of Eleanor's personal effects revealed receipts for 2 train tickets purchased under the name E. Merton. The second name, L. Rowan, matched the inscription found under her vanity. The train was scheduled to depart the night of the party, but had been cancelled due to a derailment south of the city. No passengers boarded. The tickets were never refunded. That same afternoon, Elbridge met with Adelaide Finch, the final known guest to speak with Eleanor before she vanished. Adelaide's gloved hands trembled as she held her tea, the porcelain cup chiming faintly against the saucer. She described Eleanor as distracted, her sentences halting, her smile too wide. "She said she was going to settle something tonight," Adelaide recalled. "She didn't explain what. Only that it was the last time she'd need to." Elbridge pressed for more, but Adelaide demurred. Her fingers traced a small pattern into the tablecloth. "It was as if she was speaking from behind a wall," she said. "Like she could see me but wasn't really there." Adelaide's statement was recorded and signed. That evening, Elbridge returned to the Marks' residence with a locksmith. Under the family's wary supervision, they opened the eastern attic room, a space once used as a music chamber but long since abandoned. The door resisted at first, its hinges warped from disuse. Inside, dust coated every surface. Stacked crates bore the initials MIC, Marks Iron Company, and behind a faded drape an iron cabinet stood slightly ajar. Within it lay a bundle of correspondence, tied with faded blue ribbon. The letters were dated from 1893 to early 1896. Most were mundane, filled with inquiries about event scheduling and social appointments. But near the bottom of the stack was one without an address, written in Eleanor's hand and signed simply E. It read, "I do not know who is still watching, but I know the sound the floor makes when they leave. If I am gone, do not speak my name at the table. He told me the door was never locked." I believed him. The letter contained no date, but it referenced a Thursday rain, and meteorological records indicated the last heavy Thursday rain prior to her disappearance occurred March 26th, 2 weeks before the party. The family declined to answer further questions. Mr. Marks insisted his daughter would return. His voice was steady, but the room around him was not. Furniture had been rearranged. A mirror that once hung above the hearth had been taken down and replaced with a curtain. When asked why, the housekeeper responded, "It kept showing reflections that didn't match the room." Elbridge made no comment. Instead, he requested access to the lower service corridors beneath the house. Few knew of the tunnels that ran below, used primarily by staff for deliveries and coal transfers. The cellar was damp, filled with the sour smell of rust and earth. His lantern flickered as he descended. Somewhere beneath the main hall he found an alcove recently disturbed. The stonework bore fresh scrape marks. A bundle of fabric was found there, coarse cloth like muslin, and a fragment of lace trim. The cloth was damp and tinged with grey, like it had been dragged through ash. Above him in the silence something shifted. A single drip of water fell onto the rim of his boot. Then another, steady, precise, like a leak measured in seconds. He stared upward, but the stone above was dry. The fabric was sent for analysis. No blood, no trace of known poisons. But the scent, once again, was lavender, worn through and barely clinging to the threads. Elbridge compiled his findings. The official report listed Eleanor Marks as missing under irregular circumstances. No signs of abduction, no ransom, no confirmed sightings. Yet her presence hung over the house in ways none could define. Visitors declined invitations. Staff began requesting transfers. One maid resigned, claiming she could not sleep in a house that forgets its own footsteps. What the report did not include, but what Elbridge wrote in his private journal, was a single detail found during his final inspection. In the southern pantry, behind a loose panel in the wall, he discovered a child's drawing, crude, with charcoal lines. It showed a house with no doors, just windows, and behind each one, a figure with no face. The name Eleanor was written in the corner. The paper was dry, the ink was not. By the second week of April, the case had left the echoing corridors of the Marks household and begun to seep into the larger city. Morning editions of the Herald published a cautious column titled "Heiress Marks Delayed in Return, Save Family," printed beside stories of streetcar expansions and a factory fire in Brooklyn. No photograph accompanied the article. The description was brief, clinical. Eleanor Marks, age 23, unmarried, last seen April 3rd, during a private gathering at the family residence. Not missing, the paper insisted, only withdrawing from society for health. But by April 17th, the narrative could no longer be managed. Two journalists, Henry Dalton and Louis Tibbet, both freelance but known for their coverage of financial scandals, approached the residence posing as city clerks. They were turned away, but not before Dalton caught sight of something unusual through a side window. A crate being carried by two men in plain clothes. The crate bore no shipping mark, only a number scrawled in charcoal, 82. The same number would appear 4 days later on an inventory slip submitted to the city archives, then vanish from the file entirely. Inside the archives office, junior clerk Ada Merrill noticed the discrepancy. When she retrieved the carbon duplicate, the slip was intact, clearly stamped, and noted "Private Iron Panel Residential Vault Support." It had been signed by a C. Marks and a second unfamiliar name, Elim Rook. There was no listing for such a person in city registries. That same day, Reverend Josiah Bell of Calvary Episcopal received a letter, unsigned, with a single line of handwriting. She never left the house. The letter had been folded around a program from the April 3rd gathering. Reverend Bell, known for his discretion and his long-standing friendship with the Marks family, chose not to speak publicly. But he made a private visit to the home on the evening of April 19th. His carriage arrived shortly after sunset. He was admitted by a butler unfamiliar to the rest of the staff, described only as tall, silent, and wearing a collar slightly askew. The Reverend remained inside for just under 20 minutes. Upon leaving, he reportedly told his driver to take the long way around the park. That was all he ever said of the visit. Weeks later, when asked again by a visiting deacon, he simply replied, "There are some doors that do not open from either side." Meanwhile, Inspector Elbridge had grown increasingly suspicious of how the family was managing the investigation. Requests for interviews were deflected, letters went unanswered, and reports filed by his office began to disappear. On April 21st, he returned to City Hall to find his last 3 memos missing from the case file. When he confronted his supervisor, he was informed that no formal investigation had ever been initiated into Eleanor Marks's disappearance. A clerk then produced a folder labeled E. Marks, Voluntary Retreat. It contained only a single page, a typed affidavit signed by Eleanor, dated February 14, 1896, declaring her intent to withdraw from public life for personal restoration. The signature was typed. There was no witness, no seal, and no inked impression. That night, Elbridge visited the apothecary, who had sold the laudanum. Mr. Farnham, the proprietor, remembered the sale. He recalled the man who retrieved it. Tall, dark coat, soft-spoken, not the heiress herself. The receipt bore the name Mr. Lowell Roane, yet when Elbridge presented this name to the city registrar, it did not exist. No birth record, no property, no census. The name was an echo, a placeholder. As the inspector widened his inquiry, another contradiction emerged. The guest list from April 3rd, filed as part of the house's internal archive, originally noted 72 guests, but the official party menu, prepared by the catering service Belle Cuisine, listed plates for 74, 2 meals unaccounted for. When Elbridge questioned the head chef, a man named Martin Duval, he confirmed a private order had come in just hours before the event, an additional entree, prepared separately and served not in the dining hall but in the conservatory. There were no flowers in there that night, Duval said. Just shadows and that one plate. I was told to leave it and not return. Elbridge examined the conservatory himself. The room was clean, but not new. The floor tiles bore wear from heavy furniture that had since been removed. A single brass fixture on the wall showed signs of recent polishing, though the rest of the fittings were left to tarnish. He touched the handle and felt a faint warmth, though the gas line had been cut off days earlier during renovations. Across town, journalist Henry Dalton was following his own trail. He had traced the Marks Iron Company's contracts back to a holding company that purchased wartime scrap and reprocessed it for city infrastructure. One of the ledgers from 1895 noted a brief but puzzling expenditure: vault walling 21 and 25th Ave for reinforced discretion. No architectural record described a vault on the premises. Dalton met with a retired mason, Joseph Van, who confirmed being hired for a late-night job at the Marks residence in November of the previous year. He was paid double in cash and was asked to sign a confidentiality note that was never notarized. Van described a small room with no exit, just a slot for ventilation, and heavy brickwork reinforced with a steel door. They said it was for wine, he said, but the walls were too thick for cooling. You don't keep bottles like that. By April 24th, word had spread. Curious spectators began gathering at the edge of the block. The Marks family drew the curtains. Reverend Bell was not seen in public again that month. And on the evening of the 26th, a strange development. The gas lights across 4 rooms in the house dimmed simultaneously for 7 seconds, then returned. The gas company filed a service report noting no fluctuation in city supply. Inside the house, Mrs. Barton documented the anomaly in her journal. That night she wrote a single line: "The mirror cracked in the West Hall." Elbridge returned to the house with a court order. He was not admitted. The door was opened 2 inches, and a voice informed him that the family was not available. A folded note was handed to him. It read, "Let stillness resolve what noise cannot." At the city's archives, the inventory slip for crate 82 was now missing from both primary and carbon files. Dalton, frustrated, tried to locate the rail manifest that would confirm whether any materials had left the city that week. Instead, he found a cancellation order, signed not by the company but by a third-party inspector, initials LR only. The crate, it seemed, had never moved. The missing heiress, the silent staff, the sealed vault, the disappearing paper trail. Each piece resisted the next. The deeper the inquiries went, the more elusive the image of Eleanor became. She had become a shadow not only in her own home, but in the very system meant to protect and document her. Her absence was reinforced, protected, multiplied. People began to refer to her in past tense, though none could say why. By the final day of April, Inspector Elbridge's journal held one more entry. He wrote it beneath a diagram of the house, with a small X marked in the north wall, just beyond the conservatory. The entry read, "They know she's in there, and they're waiting for the last of us to stop looking." The morning of May 1st arrived grey and airless. A haze clung to the sidewalks of Fifth Avenue, and the chimneys at the Marks residence released no smoke. Across the street, an insurance clerk named Milner Fitch paused as he passed, noting a single curtain pulled back from the second floor, then falling again, as if someone had looked out, seen too much, and thought better of it. Fitch would later sign a statement for the City Watch, though he insisted he hadn't meant to get involved. "It just looked like a house holding its breath," he said. Inside, life carried on in a stilted parody of normalcy. A delivery of linens was received at the rear entrance. Fresh ice was lowered into the kitchen cellar, yet no one answered when the bell rang at the front door, not even when a second official summons arrived from Inspector Elbridge. He had submitted it personally, attaching evidence logs, correspondence, and a sworn statement from Joseph Van. The request was not for an interview, it was for excavation. Elbridge had obtained a provisional order to inspect the northern foundation wall of the residence, the same one he had marked with an X in his journal. But before the document could be enforced, it was quietly rescinded. The paper trail simply stopped. The archive clerk who had stamped the order, a Miss Evelyn Shaw, reported the file missing 2 days later. She was reprimanded and removed from duty. A replacement clerk filed a new version of the same order, now labeled incomplete, due to jurisdictional overlap. Elbridge was instructed to cease his inquiry pending a review by city engineers. He returned that evening not as an officer, but as a man unable to look away. Under cover of dusk, he approached the south fence line and lingered beside the alley carriage gate. He noted the flicker of candlelight from the second floor. Not gaslight, candlelight low and yellow unsteady. He stood there for 21 minutes according to his own wristwatch and counted 2 figures moving within the drawing room. Neither appeared to be Charles Marks. Across town, Dalton and Tibbet worked independently now. Tibbet had lost access to his press credentials after his last article hinted at a coordinated silence around the Marks case. Dalton, meanwhile, had tracked down a woman named Lydia Clay. She had once been employed by the Marks family as a personal reader to Eleanor, a quiet woman, sharp in manner, who read aloud news, correspondence, and literature to spare the Heiress eye strain. Clay lived alone in a boarding house above a watch repair shop and agreed to speak only off record. She was always listening for something, Lydia said, voice low. You understand? Not waiting. Listening. There's a difference. Like something had already started happening, and she was trying to catch up to it. When Dalton asked what Eleanor had been reading in the weeks before the party, Clay recalled 3 things: a ledger of freight tariffs, a volume on city ordinances concerning subterranean construction, and a series of letters from an unknown correspondent, signed only with the initial R. The letters were destroyed after the party. Clay was instructed by Mrs. Barton to burn them in the parlor stove, for health and privacy. But Lydia had copied one, or most of it, in her notebook. The contents were brief and appeared to be part of a longer exchange. You must leave the top latch open on the evening in question. I will not speak with them, only with you. Do not bring light. If the grate is warm, wait. The letter had no envelope, no date, and no context beyond implication. Dalton pressed Lydia for more, but she said only, "That house is full of things that were never named out loud." Back at the residence, the household's daily rhythms grew stranger. Groceries were delivered in the early morning and taken in by unfamiliar hands. Windows on the west side were nailed shut, and one pane had been replaced with opaque glass. A seamstress contracted to repair upholstery reported a pungent chemical odor lingering in the upper hallway, a mix of turpentine, lye, and something metallic. She was told it was varnish, but no work had been done on the furnishings. Her invoice was never paid. On May 4th, Elbridge submitted his resignation. The letter was unsigned and bore no cause. A week later, he vanished from city records. His desk at the precinct remained undisturbed for several days until the superintendent authorized its clearing. Inside a locked drawer, they found his journal, but half the pages had been torn out. What remained described no actions, only impressions. The carpet keeps its own time, and they are more afraid of sound than of being seen. 3 nights later, a city watchman assigned to patrol near the residence was found unconscious outside the west gate. His head bore no injury, but he remained speechless for 2 days. When he recovered, he claimed he had entered the gate after hearing what he described as a rhythmic scraping, like stone over stone. He saw no one. The gate had not been opened from the inside. When asked how he had entered, he could not answer. His torch found beside him was cold and dry. On May 10th, Reverend Bell left a handwritten letter at the office of the city's Board of Public Health. He wrote that he had reason to believe certain structural violations in the Marks residence posed not only danger of collapse, but potential exposure to subterranean hazards unlisted in municipal records. He did not elaborate. The letter was filed, then misplaced. A summary entry remains in the log, but the contents are gone. Bell, too, ceased public appearances thereafter. By now, Dalton's investigation had narrowed to a single premise, that Eleanor Marks had not only remained within the house, but had been kept there under pretense of illness or retreat. On May 11th, he submitted a formal request for a city hearing. He was denied. The following evening, a woman identifying herself as Miss Rain Marks, cousin to Eleanor, visited the offices of the Herald. She brought with her a sealed envelope and a warning, "This is not a family matter anymore." The envelope contained only a single photograph, a silver gelatin print, unmarked, grainy. It showed a corner of a room. In the upper left, part of a figure. The dress visible matched descriptions of Eleanor's attire from the April party. The figure was sitting, turned away from the camera, in front of what appeared to be a blank stone wall. Her hair was unbound. The image was cropped, with edges torn unevenly. The photo was examined by two separate archivists. Both placed its composition within the style and equipment used by Marks Iron Company in documenting structural interiors for contract verification. One noted a flaw in the emulsion, light bleed in the lower right, as though the exposure had been corrupted by motion at the last second. That archivist later revised their statement, noting the bleed might also indicate reflected light, perhaps from a mirror or polished surface not visible in the image itself. No photographer was identified, no camera was found. On May 14th, 3 weeks after the first official summons, the Marks residence closed its gates indefinitely. No staff appeared, deliveries ceased, gaslight was extinguished. The doorbell remained broken, though no one could say when it had stopped ringing. Across the city, Eleanor's absence had become an unease rather than an incident. No funeral, no declaration. Her name faded from polite conversation. When asked directly, acquaintances referred to her with the kind of strained politeness reserved for those already considered lost to madness or disgrace, and yet no one could prove she had ever left. The night of May 19th, the silence inside the Marks residence broke. It began with the sound of iron against stone, a low deliberate grinding that echoed from beneath the floorboards of the eastern hallway, deep and physical, like a weight shifting where none should be. A neighbor, Mrs. Tilling of number 2118, heard it through her second-floor window shortly before midnight. She described it later as a noise like an anchor dragging across marble. Her account would be the first to confirm the movement of something mechanical within the house. By dawn, a group of 4 city officials had been authorized under an emergency writ to enter the Marks residence on the grounds of public hazard. Among them were a fire marshal, an engineer, a court recorder, and Deputy Inspector Joseph Raleigh, recently assigned to take over from the missing Elbridge. They arrived without announcement. The gate opened with a groan. No one met them at the door. Inside, the front hall was untouched since last seen by Elbridge nearly 3 weeks earlier. Dust lay thick across the banister and floor, yet one set of footprints was visible, small, narrow, leading from the parlor toward the north end of the house, then vanishing near the conservatory. The smell was the first thing Raleigh noticed. Not decay, but oil, heavy and recent. The source was not apparent. At 9:42 a.m., the team reached the conservatory. The glass panels were fogged from the inside, smeared by something that dulled the morning light. The central floor tile, marked in the house's original blueprint as decorative, rang hollow beneath the fire marshal's boot. Using crowbars and tools brought from the engine wagon, the team removed 3 tiles. Beneath them lay an iron hatch, oval in shape, without a visible handle. The engineer, Mr. Lott, noted the hatch was unsealed, but extraordinarily heavy. It required all 4 men to pry it open. As it lifted, a blast of air escaped, dry but with a faint bitter trace like dust from stone rubbed with sulfur. Beneath was a vertical shaft lined with masonry. A ladder, rusted and missing rungs, descended into the dark. They lowered a lantern. The flame swayed, but held. A metallic glint below indicated the shaft ended in a chamber. Against orders, and after brief argument, Raleigh descended first. He would later state that the air grew cooler with each rung. At the bottom, the floor opened into a hexagonal vault. The walls were iron-panelled, reinforced by riveted beams, and a narrow passage extended from the opposite end, vanishing into shadow. But Raleigh's attention fixed immediately on the contents of the room. To the right, propped against the wall, stood a wooden chair. In the chair sat a woman, motionless. Her gown was pale silk, its hem shredded and darkened. One slipper dangled from her foot. Her head was bowed. A lace ribbon hung from her wrist, frayed at the edge. She did not respond to the light or the presence of others. The chamber was silent, save for the faint sound of dripping water, regular, steady like a leaking faucet. It echoed with unnatural clarity across the iron walls. The engineer followed Raleigh down, then the marshal. The court recorder remained above. Raleigh approached the figure. Her skin was pale, her mouth slightly open, but no breath rose. Her fingers, folded in her lap, were clenched around something, a folded square of paper. When pried gently from her grasp, the paper tore at the crease. It bore no writing, only an imprint as though it had once been pressed against something wet. Behind the chair, embedded into the wall, was a mirror. Cracked across its surface, it reflected the chamber in jagged fragments. The woman's reflection was broken, unrecognizable. On the back of the mirror frame, etched into the iron, were the initials E.M. The chair was bolted to the floor. So was the mirror. They had not been moved in some time. The engineer estimated at least several months of dust accumulation, though the fabric of the gown showed signs of recent touch. One sleeve was folded differently, as though adjusted. To the left of the chamber, another door, flush with the wall, hidden without close inspection, was found unlocked. Inside, a smaller room, windowless, containing shelving units filled with boxes. Some held iron tools, others personal items. Gloves, a hairbrush, half-burned candles. One box held a journal, small, leather-bound, bearing the name Eleanor Marks. The last entry was dated March 30th. "I am tired of being watched," it read. "He does not speak anymore, only writes. The instructions are shorter. I can hear my name when I sleep. I don't remember where the hallway ends." Deputy Raleigh sealed the chamber by 11:00 a.m. The officials returned to the surface in silence. Outside, the day had brightened, though none of them remarked on it. By noon, city physicians had confirmed the body was Eleanor Marks. Her cause of death was not officially determined. No visible wounds, no signs of starvation. Her organs, upon preliminary examination, showed mild atrophy, but no toxins or trauma. The attending physician wrote simply, "Life ceased without clear precursor." An inquiry was opened, but no charges were filed. Charles Marks did not appear. Mrs. Barton, according to neighbours, had left the residence 2 days before. Her destination was never traced. The remainder of the staff vanished quietly. Within 1 week, the home stood completely empty. Dalton and Tibbet, denied access to the chamber, published a report in the New York Weekly under the headline, "Heiress held beneath her own house, city complicit." The article was met with public outrage and official denials. No court official would confirm the vault's existence. The blueprint submitted to city archives the following week showed no subterranean structure beneath the conservatory. The original plan had vanished from the register. Reverend Bell, upon learning of the discovery, resigned his post without ceremony. He submitted a final note to the bishop's office. It read, "We sang over a grave we were not told to see. May her silence condemn us." Raleigh submitted his report in full, including photographs taken in the chamber. The envelope containing the prints arrived sealed but empty. The negatives could not be found. 1 week later, a fire broke out in the western wing of the Marks residence. It was minor, contained within a single room, Eleanor's dressing chamber. The cause was listed as interior candle ignition. No gas line ran to that wing. The remaining contents of the house were removed within days and placed into private storage. The home was sold by midsummer. No plaque, no marker, no public record remains on the site. But among the court clerk's unclaimed records from May of that year, a single entry is still visible in the margins of the transfer report. Written faintly in the corner of the page were the words, "She was always visible, just never in the same room twice." The chamber was sealed on the morning of May 20th, following the preliminary medical report. Metal brackets were affixed across the entrance, and a wax-sealed document posted at the door read, "Private investigation under review. Entry prohibited by city ordinance." No guards were posted. The lock was changed, but the engineer's notes indicated the interior mechanism was already warped, as though from pressure or age. Deputy Raleigh returned alone that evening. His own record, written by hand and dated 8:46 p.m., was entered in his private file but never submitted to the official archive. In it, he described descending once more into the vault. He claimed the temperature had changed, grown warmer, not from weather but from within the structure itself. He removed the bolts, reopened the hatch, and stood in the center of the chamber. Eleanor's chair was gone. The mirror remained fractured in the same pattern, but the bolts on the floor were empty. No scratches, no drag marks. The wall behind the chair showed only faint impressions in the dust. The journal, too, had disappeared from the shelf. In its place, folded neatly, was the piece of blank paper previously clutched in Eleanor's hands. It had dried. The imprint had faded. He remained in the chamber for 17 minutes. No sound came from the passage. He recorded that the mirror gave back his own reflection now, but with a slight delay, an impression he couldn't reproduce for the others. No mechanism was disturbed. He resealed the chamber and returned to his office. 3 days later, Raleigh would resign and leave New York. His badge was returned by post wrapped in linen. In the aftermath, those closest to the incident began to withdraw. The physician who signed Eleanor's report took a position in New Jersey and declined all interviews. Mr. Lott, the engineer, submitted a formal notice, declining further municipal contracts, citing unstable directives and interference. He would later claim that sections of the original foundation blueprint had been altered without his consent, and that his name had been placed on plans he did not sign. When asked who had made the changes, he said only, "The lines didn't match the tools." Journalist Henry Dalton continued pressing for access to the chamber. With no legal grounds, he instead pursued the company behind the construction, the subcontracted team that had reinforced the iron walls. That firm, listed as Naylor and Priest, had operated under temporary license between 1893 and 1896. Its office had closed the previous year. Of its 3 known employees, 1 had died in a ferry accident, and the other 2 had relocated without forwarding addresses. Their worksite logs, preserved only in fragments, included a brief notation. Mark's job, below garden, non-standard weight-bearing, no acoustic tolerance. Dalton published a final article on May 26 titled, "The Room That Doesn't Want to Be Found." In it, he included a speculative rendering of the chamber, reconstructed from eyewitness accounts and the blueprint cross-sections he had copied before the originals vanished. The illustration was vague. Heavy lines, soft edges, a chair facing a wall. No figure was shown. The editor redacted most of the text, citing legal threat from unnamed parties. Only the final sentence was allowed to remain. "If we don't build the door, it will still find a way open." The story faded. New appointments, new crimes, a change in city administration. The Marks property was purchased under a different name and fenced off indefinitely for what was listed as interior stabilization. But workers never entered. The gate remained chained. The home's facade was cleaned but never restored. Of those who remained, only the housekeeper, Mrs. Barton, was located again, once briefly in July. She was seen in a rail station outside Albany, traveling under the name Louisa Baines. A former footman recognized her and attempted to speak, but she refused. He described her as thinner, older, her speech slowed. He asked about Eleanor. Her reply, "She stayed where they told her to. I think that's why they let her sit." Then she turned away. The chamber beneath the conservatory would be sealed again on June 3rd, this time in concrete. The contractor hired for the job recorded the final depth of fill as inconsistent. A 6-inch variance was noted at the far wall. The inspector dismissed it as settling. A single note on the final page of the contract reads, "Interior wall holds when undisturbed. Do not cut through load seam." Weeks later, a janitor clearing boxes from the vacated city archives found a misfiled envelope containing a small brass plate, tarnished, scratched, but engraved clearly with 3 lines, E. Mark's observation in Stillness, March, April. No one recalled authorizing a plaque. It was never hung. One final detail emerged from the office of Reverend Bell. A deacon sorting his things discovered a parcel marked, "Private, return to family if safe." Inside was a prayer book belonging to Eleanor, its cover softened with use. Between its pages, pressed into the binding, was a strand of pale hair, coarse, brittle, preserved too long to hold its color. On the back cover, written in fine graphite, a sentence, "If no one is listening, I will leave a shape for the silence." The book was never returned. It was placed in the deacon's personal safe and has remained there since. As summer settled across New York, the house on Fifth Avenue became another building, with shuttered windows and a quiet lawn. Children passed it without curiosity. Carriages rolled by without pause. The Marks' name faded from dinner conversation, then from ledgers. By the end of the year, even the company's iron stamp was discontinued. Yet in one final anomaly, recorded in September of that year, a city assessor logged the Marks' property as occupied. When questioned, he insisted someone had spoken to him from behind the door, giving name, deed number, and payment in coin. The name given was Eleanor Marks. By the first week of June 1896, the official silence surrounding the Eleanor Marks case was nearly complete. No arrest warrants were issued. No charges were brought against the family, the staff, or the construction firms involved. A press liaison from the mayor's office issued a short statement attributing the events to a complex and private tragedy involving mental illness and architectural mismanagement. No questions were permitted at the briefing. Within hours, the statement was reprinted in all major city papers under nearly identical headlines. Eleanor Marks had vanished, then she had reappeared, and then, apparently, she had never existed at all. The coroner's report was never made public. A redacted summary filed by the Board of Records listed her death as internal cessation. That phrase, used nowhere else in the city's forensic catalogue, was later struck from the index. The certificate was marked with a reference code that, when cross-checked, led to an empty file folder. Inside the community, the absence left behind by Eleanor's discovery was stranger than the loss itself. Families who had once attended parties at the Marks estate now walked past the house without acknowledging it. The corner grocer, who had delivered fine goods to the family kitchen each week, quietly removed the account ledger from his shelf. When asked why, he replied, "They paid in coin I've never seen again." The Marks Iron Company dissolved by year's end. No formal bankruptcy was filed. Its remaining assets were absorbed into two minor subsidiaries, both renamed within a fortnight. The workers, many of whom had spent decades under Marks contracts, received final pay in sealed envelopes containing handwritten notes that read simply, "You are complete." Several reported that their ledgers had been modified, overtime erased, bonuses doubled. When pressed, none could produce the original books. Charles Marks withdrew from public life. His last appearance was at a civic board meeting in August, where he sat silently through the session and signed his name with the wrong date, April 3rd. His signature matched his daughter's, down to the flourished M. He left the meeting without speaking. He was not seen again. Reverend Josiah Bell died quietly the following winter. In the months before his passing, parishioners described him as forgetful, withdrawn, and often heard murmuring verses not from any scripture. His replacement found the vestry untouched, save for a single note pinned to the underside of the altar cloth. Some silences are occupied. Inspector Elbridge's journal, once thought lost, resurfaced in a box of surplus belongings shipped to a municipal warehouse. The pages were intact, though many were stuck together with moisture. The ink had blurred in places, but one section, written on April 27th, remained legible. She wasn't buried. She wasn't forgotten. She was filed. No further writings from Elbridge were ever found. The chamber beneath the Marks house was never reopened. In 1898, the property was purchased by a Dutch businessman who proposed demolishing the structure to build a boarding house. Work began in March but ceased within 5 days. The contractor reported that laborers refused to continue after discovering non-compliant foundational elements. No official complaint was submitted. The purchase was reversed under quiet terms. By 1900, the building was listed as city-owned. The windows were shuttered. No trespassing notices were affixed in triplicate. Children in the neighborhood avoided the sidewalk in front. Those who walked past reported a smell like dust and ink. One boy, aged 9, claimed he saw a woman's silhouette moving behind the second-floor curtains. He drew it for his teacher, who kept the drawing for years in her desk, refusing to explain it to visitors. The woman had no face. Her hand was pressed to the glass. Attempts to document the Marks' property grew sporadic. A photographer commissioned by the Historical Preservation Society tried 3 times to photograph the house, but each plate developed blank. The camera, tested elsewhere, functioned without flaw. The Society filed a claim for equipment failure and did not return. An archivist named Ruth Morland, tasked with cleaning the city's deed records in 1901, found a discrepancy in the Fifth Avenue registry. The house at 2120 was listed under 2 owners, Charles Marks, deceased, and a second name, inked in red pencil at the top corner, E. Roan. No record of the name existed in probate. When the entry was copied for inquiry, the name vanished from the transcript. It returned only when viewed on the original. The red pencil could not be erased. Morland reported the finding to her superior. The following week, she resigned. Her final report concluded with the line, "Some ink is meant to stay wet." Despite its vacancy, the Marks residence continued to accrue maintenance charges. The city issued no orders for demolition. By 1903, its windows were bricked over. A single wooden door remained at the rear, marked with a painted 82. No key was held by city staff. A locksmith dispatched to inspect the entrance reported the lock was non-standard and opened without resistance. When asked what he found, he refused to answer. His report listed only, "Nothing inside." But it was listening. The legacy of the Marks case was absorbed not by courts or reforms, but by the slow, dense machinery of bureaucracy. Laws changed, property codes were amended. A clause was inserted into zoning law to prevent sub-foundational living quarters of ambiguous designation. It passed without debate. No public monument was ever created. No plaque was placed. Inquiries into the location now return a standard response. No dwelling by that name is registered. But if you ask a certain type of archivist, quiet, long employed, late to retire, they might lean closer and say, "Some entries are still in the margins." They never moved her to the center. One final entry was recorded, dated 1906, in a private builder's manual printed in limited run. On the last page, under the section titled Unadvised Techniques, a diagram appears. It shows a room square with no ceiling, 1 chair and a small fixture labeled simply Observation Mirror, Elliptical Application. No author is listed. The imprint is faint, as if pressed rather than written. And if you follow the room's measurements, if you draw it out to scale as one apprentice did, you find the shape does not close. In the spring of 1904, the last surviving member of the original Marks household staff died in a county home outside Poughkeepsie. His name was Walter Kerrigan. He had served as a footman for 6 years before leaving suddenly in the days following Eleanor's disappearance. His death would have gone unrecorded, save for the fact that a librarian cataloguing his effects found a single object tucked into the lining of an old valise, a brass door handle, ornate and cold to the touch, its mounting edge filed down as if forcibly removed. Etched faintly along the curved side was a fragment of a sentence, "Remains under control if..." No official records matched the object to any known structure, but the librarian, noting the inscription, quietly forwarded it to the municipal archive, where it was placed without notation into a drawer marked Unverified Implements. It has not been displayed since. By 1905, the property at 2120 Fifth Avenue remained the only structure on the block left undeveloped. Its windows stayed bricked. The land had passed through 3 holding companies, each of which defaulted on taxes without explanation. Invoices were returned unopened. When city officers attempted to conduct a forced acquisition, the deed could not be located. The registrar's file simply read, "See private file, see Marks estate." No such file was found. All drawers labeled under Marks had been emptied in 1902, according to a now-deceased clerk. Her margin note in the audit, transferred under witness seal. Not to return. Among the surviving architectural documents for the neighborhood, a revised city map dated October 1905 labels the lot not as vacant or residential, but with the strange designation, deferred. No corresponding code exists in the zoning manual. A cross-reference offered in the map's index leads to an addendum printed only once in a limited council edition, containing 2 pages of definitions unrelated to property. The final term on the last page, deferred, not missing, not present, not concluded. Meanwhile, Eleanor's name became a kind of absence unto itself. When referenced in public records, it often appeared as E. Marks discontinued, or occasionally stricken. A court stenographer assigned to review the original inquest testimony noted that her name was often omitted from the questioning entirely, replaced by the subject, or these in one transcripts contain the unexplained pauses, empty brackets and notations such as inaudible despite clarity. Efforts to reproduce the audio wax cylinders of the testimony failed. The devices played nothing but low clicks and intermittent silence. Public fascination with the case had faded, but remnants lingered. In letters, in whispered anecdotes, in the cautious pauses of city officials when discussing property histories. Her group of law students in 1906 tried to write a mock trial based on the Marks inquiry. Their notes survive only in fragments. One line, hastily scrawled in the margin of the final page, reads, "We asked who had the key. The room answered." There was never an official acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no tribunal, no hearing. The court's position was that the events fell outside prosecutable cause. The room was declared part of a non-documented substructure, not affecting municipal safety. What Eleanor had endured, who had authorized it, and for what purpose, remained redacted beneath layers of institutional inertia. And yet, across the city, echoes surfaced in small, persistent ways. A young woman working in the Central Telegraph Office found her initials changed in employment logs to EM, despite her name being Elsie Morton. She corrected the file 3 times, each time the alteration returned within a week. After her 4th correction, she was quietly transferred to a rural office. When asked about the incident years later, she replied, "It was never a clerical error. I think it was a rehearsal." In a gallery near the University District, a private collector displayed a series of photographic plates labeled Studies in Interior Composition. Plate 7 depicted an empty chair in a dim room. Plate 8, the same room, same chair with the faintest suggestion of fabric across the seat. Plate 9 was missing. Plate 10 showed only the mirror, slightly cracked. When the exhibit closed, the collector declined all offers of sale. The gallery was shuttered the following year due to unspecified inconsistencies in cataloguing. No definitive evidence remained, no body to exhume, no trial to revisit. And yet the foundation of the house stayed marked on city plans, long after it should have been erased. Surveyors examining the lot for future utility expansion reported instruments behaving unpredictably. Tape measures returned inconsistent distances. Surveyor levels tilted at incorrect angles when aligned with the eastern retaining wall. A final report filed in December 1905 described the soil as structurally firm but ideologically unsettled. The phrase was never used again in municipal documentation. Today, the land where the Marks residence once stood is listed as privately held but unoccupied. Official visits are discouraged. No permit applications have been accepted since 1906. When questioned, city clerks offer polite deferral and suggest inquiries be directed to a legal office that no longer operates. The last known visitor to speak publicly about the location was a foreign academic who claimed to be conducting a study on early urban confinement architecture. He toured the surrounding area, asked discreet questions, and disappeared within 2 months. His final letter to his university stated only, "The room was not a prison. It was a decision made visible. What remains is not a crime scene nor a legend, but a vacancy carved so precisely into the record that it appears deliberate." Eleanor Marks did not disappear. She was contained, preserved, or perhaps noted. And in the city's archives, within a folder too thin for its age, there is still 1 page left blank, filed where her name should be. If this story moved you, if you made it to the end, It's because you also feel that these hidden truths must come to light. Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. That way, we'll know how far these stories reach. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering them. This story was reconstructed from documents that were found. All names have been changed to protect the source.